Hi, I'm Rod Hughes, and joining me today is Scott Pannone, Senior Risk Consultant with Lamb Insurance Services. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Rod.
We're here to talk today about common winter-related risks. So, Scott, let's jump right in. What are some of the most common winter-related risks for organizations that you see resulting in claims each year?
Absolutely. Great question. One of the biggest risks we see amongst nonprofit and human service organizations in the wintertime is slips and falls. And that can be both to employees and third parties who may include residents or program participants, guests, or even vendors who might come on site for a business purpose. Although there might be a trend amongst injury cause, the risk factors might vary. And some of those ones that we see most commonly include parking lot slips and falls. That's not just related to walking to and from the facility, but falls when entering or exiting a vehicle. When snow thaws and refreezes, it also can be problematic, which adds to the importance of pre-planning and constant monitoring of those areas. And proper lighting can also be a contributing factor as daytime is limited in the winter months. And lastly, I would say human error is another large contributing factor, as individuals might be rushing or carrying objects, not paying attention, or wearing improper footwear for the weather, etc. And unfortunately, those scenarios could be a little bit more difficult to prevent or avoid, but we can highlight some of those mitigation strategies later on.
And Scott, while some of this may not sound catastrophic, talk to me a little bit about some of the give me some anecdotal examples of the types of injuries that can result so that we can understand what the impact is both on the nonprofit and its policy premiums.
Slips and falls are amongst the most frequent and severe types of claims that occur from both an employee and a third-party liability perspective. NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, reports that roughly 1 out of every 4 non-fatal workplace injuries are related to slips and falls. And winter-related risks contribute a notable degree to that. So when an employee or third party, such as residents or person supported or guests, fall, the extent of that injury can vary. But oftentimes the injury results in a range of musculoskeletal injuries to one or maybe even multiple body parts. And more severe injuries can result in fractures and in some scenarios, even broken bones. But regardless if an injury is employee related or third party related, if these slips and fall events are happening regularly, they're undoubtedly going to have a negative impact on insurance premiums. For workers' compensation, a rating factor that nonprofits have an influence in controlling is their experience modification rating factor, which is a reflection of that organization's historical cost of injuries over a 3-year policy period, and that rating is then compared to the average losses of other like organizations in their state. So according to NCCI, the average cost of a slip and fall claim between 2019 and 2020 is around $48,000. So a trend in this injury type can really affect an XMOD and how much an organization pays in workers' comp premium in future years. Although general liability policies are not subject to an experience modification factor, when a third party files a tort claim against an organization for bodily injury, the experience is overall affected, and that nonprofit is likely to see their premiums rise when their policy renews.
So these can be huge cost centers for these nonprofits, correct, Scott?
Absolutely, yes.
And how, in your estimation, how avoidable are these types of of injuries?
In the risk management world, we believe that all incidents are avoidable. There is, however, a small number of injuries that arise from what we call, quote unquote, acts of God in the insurance world, but we tend to believe those resulting from an individual's behavior or those that stem from maybe a defect in the physical environment can be avoided. Sure, it's a little frustrating when an injury is a result of human error because it sometimes feels like an organization has limited control over that scenario, but anticipating what can happen and planning accordingly certainly helps, as does conducting a thorough incident investigation to learn about the details that led up to the injury, and then from there taking corrective actions to reduce the potential for similar future occurrences.
Great. And Scott, what are some of the best practices you've seen that can help mitigate the risk and protect both the nonprofit as well as those living and working there?
I would suggest, as far as mitigation strategies, really preparation is a key ingredient to that equation. What I would suggest is that preparation focus in on four key areas. One is externally, preparing parking lots and walkways. It's important that before the winter season to check drainage and remove obstruction from those particular areas to avoid backup that can ultimately freeze over. Removing leaves from walking areas, which would make walking surfaces slip when wet, and identifying sites where snow will be piled. Choose sites where thaw and refreeze cycles, won't create dangerous ice. And of course, check parking lot lighting. That's also a contributing factor due to visibility, and which is ultimately restricted due to winter daylight hours. So number two, preparing for snow removal. Organizations don't want to be caught off guard without proper supplies, whether it be sand or salt, or caught off guard with equipment that's not in good working order. So maintenance and facilities should be checking snow blowing equipment that's good and in good working order, before the start of the season, making sure they have the proper tools on hand to be able to, clear the key walking areas. Another area for preparation is indoor. Entrances and exits. Just as much as the focus is on exterior risks, indoor risks in the winter cannot be overlooked. So it's important to check the condition and availability of floor mats. In the wintertime, with the increase of debris and moisture coming in, it's important to ensure adequate mat length, which would cover, as a general rule of thumb, about 3 to 4 steps per foot. And it's also important to check the availability of wet floor signs. Those wet floor signs would warn of hazardous conditions in those areas. Another area to prepare is your employees. Organizations should be encouraging employees to wear proper footwear. That would include well-fitting boots, maybe rubber overshoes or shoes that are slip resistant on snow and ice. Low-heeled dress shoes and athletic shoes offer fair to good traction on dry surfaces, but when it comes to traction on snow and ice, they typically offer, very poor traction. Lastly, when removing snow, want to ensure consistent protocols in treating for snow and ice. This may include daily walks of external premises by either managers, facilities, or maintenance teams. And that process would include retreatment of walking surfaces as necessary. One area that's not talked about too often is really the adoption of snow maintenance treatment logs. And, although a snow maintenance treatment log process and program doesn't necessarily prevent a claim, should one occur, it's a good tool used to recreate the facts relative to maybe an employee or a third-party injury. And by documenting facts such as, the time of snow treatment or areas covered or the amount of salt or sand applied and number of treatments applied, etc., organizations could then show that they respond to winter weather risks accordingly and are really acting as a reasonably prudent organization, and which will help on the defense of a claim, particularly on the liability side. And another benefit in snow maintenance treatment logs is that these written records can be kept for far longer than data recorded via, say, video surveillance. So it's a practice worth considering. At the end of the day, we would also encourage nonprofit organizations to include employees to obtain suggestions in preventing winter slips and falls, just as much as employees have experience in providing a great service to their consumers or doing a particular task more efficiently. The experience of employees also include ways to conduct their jobs safer both for themselves and also the guests or the individuals that they're serving. So we always encourage organizations to tap into that knowledge and ask that employees become part of the solution to further enhance the culture and safety within their organizations.
Scott Pannone, Senior Risk Consultant, great insights. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it. For Lamb
Thank you.
Insurance Services, I'm Rod Hughes.